Good morning. Thank you, John, for that nice introduction, and welcome everybody to the Public Policy Forum. It's great to have all of you here. So now that our panel is settled, I'm going to set a bit of the stage for our food safety panel today. So I'm going to go ahead and start here. Let's see, one more. There we go. So there's never been a time like this where so many consumers are eating seafood and really making an impact on the amount of seafood that's been eaten around the world. And seafood is about 20 kilograms per person per year, and that's the average. So you can see that there's quite a bit more that is eaten as well. And when you think of the amount of animal protein that's eaten, there's about 17% of that animal protein that is actually comprised of seafood. And in some places, it's more than that. It's up to as much as 50% of the animal protein. So those are the numbers, but really we're here today to talk about food safety and what it means to have food safety in seafood. And as John White mentioned, there's several aspects of that, and our panel today is going to address many of these. And so if you think about the emerging diseases, as you start to see a rise in temperature in the seawater, and you start to see some fish migrating further north, and they start to combine with some of the pathogens there, you're going to see different types of emerging diseases in our seafood. There's also the HABs, or the harmful algal blooms. And with them, there is a release in toxins, and there is these cryptic blooms that happen in our coastal waters where our seafood is harvested from. We will also see some discussions today about seafood fraud and traceability, and then we'll be looking closely at environmental conditions and pollutants and how they also affect some of our seafood. So I'm excited that our panel is here today. We're going to have a great discussion with all of you included. And so let's take a look. Let's take a look at where our seafood is coming from. So if you look at this graph here, and you look on the y-axis, you can see that that's the amount of millions of tons of seafood. And then at the bottom, you can see a timeline that starts in the 1950s through 2050. What you'll see here is that seafood harvest fisheries from the wild reached a plateau somewhere around the 1980s, and it has continued to reach that level. And so it means that there's really not the opportunity to collect a lot more from the oceans, but to keep a steady amount of seafood. So as population is increasing, the most natural thing to do is to have this domesticated aquaculture that can help to meet the needs. And so you can see today we're around 50%, when I say of the seafood that's both fisheries from the wild and then fisheries that is from aquaculture. And it is projected that by the next 20, 30, 40 years, that increase is going to go up to somewhere between 65 and as much as 75% of the seafood will be coming from aquaculture. So as we talk about that, in the United States, about 1% of the aquaculture is produced in our nation here. So that leaves us with a very large trade deficit of about 11 billion for seafood. And so you can see here that the growth for aquaculture in our nation is got huge potential, and you'll be hearing about that today in many of the panels. And so this growth for aquaculture and this trade deficit was also mentioned by the newly appointed Secretary of Commerce, Wilbur Ross. And he's looking at how can we increase the aquaculture and decrease the trade deficit. So when we think about aquaculture, we think about it both as an onshore industry, and we think about it also as an offshore industry. I'd like to show you an example here of FAU Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute's Aquaculture Development Park. It's a 30-acre aquaculture park, and it's now in its 20th year of existence. And it's an example of a facility that grows all different types of species of fish, shellfish, and seaweeds, and also shrimp. And the idea of this aquaculture development park over the years has been to develop technology and then to transfer it into industry. And we've been able to do that in the fish, the shellfish, and the shrimp species that are grown in the United States. So I mentioned to you that one of the aspects of aquaculture is recirculating aquaculture. Recirculating aquaculture means that you reuse the water over and over again through a mechanism of filtration. This is one way that we can ensure food safety and food biosecurity, is to be able to control the water. We can grow species year-round because we can control the temperature, we control the quality of the water. We can reduce the water consumption through recirculating because you continue to reuse that water, which means that there's less waste, less effluent that's leaving the facilities. So it's a very environmentally friendly type of aquaculture. It is an opportunity to have intensive aquaculture when you have recirculation. So recirculation aquaculture will both be able to provide fingerlings or tiny juvenile fish, both for onshore aquaculture and also for offshore aquaculture. So integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, you might have heard of it as IMTA, and this is something that's not brand new, but has been used both in offshore aquaculture, it's been used in pond aquaculture, and at Harbor Branch we're also looking at it more intensively, combining it with recirculating aquaculture. And you can see in the very middle, you can see this filtration system. It's like the hub of a bicycle wheel. And from that, it is able to deliver different qualities of water that goes out to the various different species that are grown in the system. And so depending on, you start with the fish and the shrimp that are a fed system, but from there, the bioflocculation and the waste products can there be partitioned and then filtered by the oysters or grazed by the urchins, or the suspended or the dissolved nutrients can then be brought in by the seaweeds, and then the water returns back to the fish again. So this is a really good system in terms of energy efficiency and waste efficiency, and it's something that we've been working on for many years now at Harbor Branch. So let's go back to the consumer. The consumer is really what's driving the consumption patterns. And what does the consumer do to drive those consumption patterns? It's all about their knowledge and all about what they know and what the criteria is for them to be able to decide on what seafood to eat. So it's driven by health in terms of what am I going to eat, and it's going to be some type of seafood because we know that seafood's very good for health. It's going to be driven by the nutrition of that seafood, the convenience of that seafood, the variety that's out there, whether the fish is wild or if it's farmed. The value, how much does it cost? The sustainability, both from an economic, both from a social, both from an environmental standpoint. And then consumers are looking to buy safe and high quality seafood. How are consumers getting their information? For wild and for fisheries, there are now a number of certificates, and the certificates are being put together by the producers, by the processors, and also by the retailers. And so, so now you will see these eco-labels, and you'll know that there's a lot of criteria that's gone into making sure that this seafood is sustainable, that it is safe, that it is high quality. And I do want to mention the Marine Stewardship Council, who is one of our sponsors of the Public Policy Forum today. So there's no right or wrong answer, but at least the consumers now have some tools or information that will help them. The other tool is the seafood guide, and each of you were, at your seat were given a seafood guide. And I also want to thank the Monterey Bay Aquarium for being a sponsor today as well. These seafood watch guides are just invaluable. And the seafood watch guides can be found as an app, as on the web, and also, of course, these handy cards that you can put in your wallet. And so it helps the consumer to understand some best choices, good alternatives, and avoids. And it's based on many criteria, such as the fishing and aquaculture practices, such as whether or not there's contaminants. Maybe there might be some mercury in some of the food. pollutions and the stock, the health of the stocks themselves. And so if you go to the Seafood Watch website, you can actually start to understand why they were put on the list, why they are the good alternatives, or why they are the best alternatives. And then you can start to map out what you as a consumer can decide on what is going to be in your portfolio of the fish that you like to eat or the seafood that you like to eat. So I'd like to wrap up with this quote from the Food and Agricultural Organization, from the director, that promoting responsible and sustainable fisheries and aquaculture is key to the health of our planet and is also key to our own health. And that future food safety and security all hinge on how we treat the blue world. And he couldn't have said it better. So now I'd like to turn to our panelists and introduce them all, and then each of them will give their perspective on food safety this morning.